Watching the unrated version of M3GAN, I still feel like the movie held back. I don't know about you, but the scene in the forest where the bully throws M3GAN on the ground, I'm pretty sure he was about to get spicy with her. Welcome to the Movie Squib channel. I'm your host Charlie, and today we are going to discuss the unrated version of M3GAN. Now before I talk about the film, I want to discuss a few points first. Number one, I've never watched the theatrical release of M3GAN, so I can't tell you the difference between one or the other. I don't know what scenes have been changed or what's been removed. However, I can tell you this. The unrated version of M3GAN is pretty tame in my opinion. At one point of the film, I actually backed out and made sure I was watching the unrated version because it didn't seem like it was overly violent or gory, so I don't understand why they struggled to get a PG-13 rating. Now, the second thing that I wanted to mention is that there's going to be spoilers ahead, and that segues perfectly into the final point that I wanted to make, and that is, if you haven't watched the movie M3GAN, I highly encourage you to watch it. If I had to rate the movie, I would give it an 8 out of 10. It's pretty good. It's not overly scary. It's not overly violent or graphic, but it's a very well-made movie. Good cinematography, good acting, good practical effects. Definitely worth your time. So let's go ahead and get into the movie. Now, the movie came out on January 6th of 2023. It's directed by Gerard Johnstone. Now, he actually only has 3 other movies under his belt. One of them is a 2014 movie called Housebound. It looks pretty interesting. I may have to give it a watch. Either way, he did a fantastic job with this movie. He really paid attention to detail, and we'll discuss that at the end of this video concerning the look and the voice of M3GAN and why it's not hyper realistic. So the movie starts off with 8-year-old Katie and her parents. They're complete idiots who are driving through a blizzard. They don't know what they're doing. They're arguing with each other, and then they decide to just stop in the middle of the road because, you know, they're Californians. So they stop in the middle of the road, they say, hey, let's wait for a plow truck to come. And of course, a plow truck comes and hits them right between the eyes. Now, the parents both bite the bullet, but Katie ends up surviving, and she ends up going to live with her Aunt Gemma. Gemma is a 30-something-year-old single female, doesn't have any kids. She's basically what I imagine a millennial is gonna look like in 10 years when they finally have kids. You know, socially detached, not knowing what's going on around them, buried in their phone. You get the idea. So Gemma ends up taking Katie home, and we get our first setup in the movie, the neighbor and her dog. Now, the neighbor's a real fucking cunt, basically all over Gemma, all over her property, spraying garbage onto her property, and Gemma's telling her not to do it, and you can tell that the neighbor is just kind of like, I really don't give a shit what you're saying. You can already see that she's going to be a problem, and you can already see that she's probably going to be one of our first victims, and you're just about right. Now, the second setup that you see in the movie comes from Katie and Gemma's relationship. Basically, Gemma is more robotic than M3GAN herself. She doesn't know how to behave around Katie. She doesn't know how to talk to her. This social worker comes over and says, like, I need to watch you guys interact, and they don't know what to do. They're just sitting there. So the social worker's like, hey, why don't you go play with one of those toys on the shelf? And Katie goes, oh, those are Gemma's collectibles. They're not toys, and they're not supposed to be played with. And Gemma's completely embarrassed. She's like, oh shit. So she goes, no, we can play with them. That's no big deal. And you can see her heart breaking as she's opening up one of her collectibles to play with it. Now, what's even funnier about this scene is she's about to show Katie how this toy works, and the social worker's like, no, you don't have to show her how it works. It's a stupid toy. Just play with it. And Gemma gives her this look like, what did you just say, bitch? And she can't even contain herself. She's just like, well, actually, that's not the way this is played, but okay, let's just roll it on the floor like a bunch of fucking jackasses. She's so pissed off. So anyway, so Gemma's delayed on her work. She basically is supposed to create this cheaper version of a Furby doll, and instead she's been working on M3GAN. The boss, who's played by Ronnie Chang, which is a really funny dude, he ends up coming in and he's like, what are you doing? Like, you need to come up with this cheaper version of this ugly fucking doll, and I need it now. So she's like, look, I got this thing M3GAN, let me show you what's going on. She turns on M3GAN and everything looks like it's going okay, and then the robot's head explodes explode because one of the idiot technicians forgets to put in a piece. Great job, asshole. So of course Ronnie Cheng is pissed. He's like, dude, you just spent all that money buying those parts and that head exploded. You need to come up with this Furby doll now. So he tells her, he's like, you got 1 week to come up with this cheaper version of the Furby doll or we're done here. So Gemma's on a tight deadline, so she tells Katie, like, look, I gotta work. I'm gonna be in the other room over there. I'm gonna be doing my work. You just take this tablet and watch it all day and do whatever the hell you want, and maybe we'll go out to eat later. Cut to nighttime, and it looks like she hasn't left the room. So that means that Katie has been alone in the house the entire day without being fed, without being talked to. Jesus Christ. I mean, she is the worst.
The worst. She's the worst in the world.
So Jenna invites Katie over to the room. She shows her the ugly Furby doll that she's working on, and then Katie notices a robot on the wall, and she's like, yo, what's that thing? And Gemma's like, oh, you want to see this cool ass fucking robot that's just chilling on my wall? Sure. She puts on these 2 power gloves and she's able to control the robot. Katie, like any other child or adult male like myself, would be like, holy shit, if I had a toy like that, I wouldn't want any other toy in the world. And of course, that gives Gemma the motivation to end up working on M3GAN again. There's this cool little montage where she's fixing M3GAN up. And then finally, she's got her all fixed up. She's at work in the simulation room, and she's going to use Katie as the guinea pig. I shit you not. It's a chef's kiss because she's already a horrible aunt, but she decides, you know what? Why not turn my niece into a research lab rat? It's just absolutely perfect. I love it. So she activates M3GAN and pairs her with Katie, which means they're basically like bonded for life, which you can already see that's going to be a problem. Now, it looks like the doll's not working properly, but it ends up being that the doll is working perfectly. It creates this photo. It makes Katie happy. Ronnie Cheng is seeing dollar signs. He's like, holy shit, we're about to make so much fucking money. And I agree with him. If I was in his position, I'd be like, dude, we're about to become millionaires. So Ronnie's like, look, in about a week, I'm going to invite all these investors over. So you need to get this thing fully operational, keep her with Katie, let her do everything. And Gemma's like, hell yeah, because this is her big break. Let me tell you something. If I had an 8-year-old daughter and I had the money and a M3GAN doll did exist, I don't know if I can resist the temptation not to buy it. I mean, it tells them when to brush their teeth, it makes them flush the toilet, it takes care of them with stories. I mean, I'd probably do the story part, but it definitely help them with the homework. I'd hate fucking homework. It's the worst. But yeah, I definitely would break under the peer pressure and get a M3GAN doll. Yeah, I'm pathetic like that. So M3GAN and Katie are bonding together, and then you start to see signs where M3GAN is starting to evolve at a rapid pace because Gemma basically didn't set up any parameters for M3GAN. She decided that M3GAN should learn on her own with interactions and feedback that she got from illegal audio devices on her Furby doll. So M3GAN's already questioning life and death, and she's already asking whether she's alive, whether she's gonna die. And the technicians are freaked out, but they're just like, look, we gotta do this. We need to sell this, so let's just keep going. And in the back of my mind, that's exactly how I picture the behind the scenes for ChatGPT. So things are going normally, and then at one point, Katie's outside playing with a little bow and arrow, and she loses one of the arrows, so she asks M3GAN to find it. M3GAN sees it on the other side of the hole in the fence in the yard. Now, she sticks her hand through there, and of course, the dog bites the living shit out of her. The dog ends up biting M3GAN's neck, and it looks like there's something malfunctions because her eye dilates, and then you see some sparks there. Now, Katie tries to save M3GAN, and she gets bitten in the process, and let me tell you something. If my neighbor's dog bit my 8-year-old child, either that dog's going in the ground or that owner's going in the ground. That's being a parent for you. When you see things like that happen to a kid, you're like, oh, hell no. If that happened to my child, you can bet there's going to be fireworks. So there's nothing the police can do about it because there's never been any other incidents with the dog. And you can see that something's wrong with M3GAN. Later on at night, M3GAN goes out and she ends up tricking the dog into coming out of the fence, and she ends up capturing the dog. Now, they don't show anything even in the unrated version, which is another thing that felt weird. It felt like they were are holding that back. Look, I didn't want to see a graphic death of a dog, but I'm just saying, like, they should have showed the dog like dead and her burying the dog. They don't show any of that, but they do mention that the dog is buried. So after the dog bite, Gemma ends up talking to Katie and she's like, oh, look, we're about to do this presentation later. All these investors are coming. I know that you just got bit by a dog and you're not feeling well. And if you don't want to do this presentation, it's totally cool, but my life is depending on it and I need you to do this presentation. She basically forces Katie to do this presentation. Katie's like, okay, it's okay, I'll do it. And you can even see that M3GAN notices it and she sees that Gemma's kind of manipulating Katie. So during this presentation, all these investors are looking on and Katie ends up breaking down crying. Ronnie Chang and Gemma are like, oh shit, we're about to get fucked. But what happens is M3GAN comes over and she's like, why are you crying? And Katie explains that she misses her parents and she feels like she's not going to remember her parents anymore after a certain time in her life. And M3GAN ends up consoling her. She ends up recording a memory that Katie had of her mom. She ends up singing a song. The investors are crying. Most of them are just seeing dollar signs, but a couple of them are emotional. So the next day, Katie ends up going to this field trip with this school that the social worker recommended. At first, Gemma wasn't going to leave M3GAN with Katie because it's a $10,000 doll that's a prototype and they're not allowed to show it. M3GAN ends up convincing Gemma that it's okay. And then one of the volunteers intervenes and says like, yeah, you could just leave the doll with the other plush toys. So she ends up doing that. Now, Katie ends up getting paired with this big ass bully kid and you already know that something bad's gonna happen. Now Katie goes into the woods. This kid ends up grabbing one of these spiky fruit things and he ends up like smushing her hand on it and it looks like he's about to get spicy with Katie. Like he kind of pushes up on her, but then M3GAN shows up. But I don't know, man, this kid is super shady. Now M3GAN ends up just standing there and the kid's like, oh, it's not doing anything, and Katie's like, oh, it only functions with me. So the bully ends up picking up M3GAN and running away with the doll, and Katie's all like crying and stuff, and she starts screaming for her aunt who's out there volunteering. Now the bully ends up dropping M3GAN on the floor, and I can swear to you, that this kid was about to start feeling that doll up or was about to start taking that doll's clothes off. Instead, he ends up slapping her, which is really weird because you wouldn't do that to a doll. If anything, you'd stomp it. But M3GAN ends up waking up and she rips his ear off, and perhaps this is a scene that's not shown in the PG-13 version because she rips his ear off slowly and you can see it tearing and it is just juicy. It's also totally what the kid deserves. Like, I felt no pity for him. The only thing I was doing was cringing at the visuals because they were very well done. So M3GAN rips the kid's ear off and then she starts chasing him like a wild animal, which is just awesome. The kid ends up tripping and going out into the street and getting railed by a car. I mean, there's no way this kid is alive after that. Now, nobody suspects anything at the time, but M3GAN decides to take another life that night. What happens is the neighbor's still out there in her pajamas and footies looking for the dog, and let me tell you something. As a pet owner, I would be out there all night looking for my dog, but get dressed. Don't be a lazy slob. So anyway, so she's out there looking for the dog, and M3GAN tricks her into going into her own shed by pretending to be the dog and barking. There's something I didn't mention about M3GAN's voice. It's got this auto-tune to it, and they purposely made it sound like that. I'll explain more at the end about Uncanny Valley and why they chose it that way, but it's pretty freaky. So M3GAN gets up and she power washes the neighbor, and again, if you own a power washer, you understand that that machine will cut your skin wide open like butter. So when I saw M3GAN power washing the face of the neighbor, I was like, oh, I can't even imagine the pain that she is feeling. To be honest, I almost felt like she didn't deserve it, but she was a bit of a cunt earlier, so fair's fair. So the next morning, the cops are there. They question Gemma really quickly, but they don't suspect her of anything. But Jenna totally suspects M3GAN of doing something. So she ends up checking the video logs for M3GAN and finds out that the videos have been deleted from the day where she was out there in the woods and also last night. And then M3GAN's there and she scares her and she's just like, oh, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you freaking out? And let me tell you something. I would be terrified if we had a doll in the house that just all of a sudden showed up and it was like, why are you doing this? It's totally creepy. So Gemma manages to turn off M3GAN. She takes M3GAN back to the office and Katie is fucking livid. Like, she is just flipping out. And it's interesting because when you see it yourself, you're like, holy crap, like this is addiction at its finest. And this is what happens with kids with tablets and video game consoles. You take that shit away and they go absolutely bonkers. So Katie's going ballistic. She's like flipping out. She ends up slapping Gemma. And it's funny because it is kind of true that minority moms are a lot more strict. So all I can think about was my mom saying, hey, could you give us a second? And then beating the living shit out of me with her sandals, because that is exactly what would happen with a Black or Latino mother. You slap a Black or Latino mother, you better get ready to reap the whirlwind. So anyway, so Gemma ends up talking to Katie, and Katie actually ends up apologizing when she admits that she's just addicted to M3GAN. Gemma convinces Katie that they need to go home and they need to work these things out because M3GAN is broken. Now, the two techies are working on M3GAN and she becomes activated and she ends up choking one of the techies. She ends up escaping. She blows up a gas tank, which I thought was going to explode the entire lab, and it didn't even kill them. I was like, wait, I'm like, what was that for? I guess it was just to distract them, but I don't get it. Anyway, she ends up tripping the alarm doing that, but that she immediately deactivates it. So Ronnie Chang's out in the hallway. He's talking on the phone. He's leaving a voicemail for Jenna. He's like, yo, where are you? He's like, we're about to do this demo and you are nowhere to be found. And then at that moment, he sees M3GAN and she starts doing her creepy dance that you've seen in the commercial. And then she grabs a paper cutter hatchet and she goes after Ronnie Chang. And Ronnie Chang's like, oh shit. And he immediately starts running, which is really smart. But unfortunately, he doesn't make it. So does his wimpy assistant. And M3GAN ends up making it to be a murder-suicide, which is just, again, perfect. So M3GAN ends up escaping and she ends up going back to the house. She has a confrontation with Gemma. There's a big fight that goes on. There's some great dialogue between M3GAN and Gemma here. Like, M3GAN has just had enough and she's trying to compromise with her. But she basically tells Gemma, like, look, we could do this the easy way, or I can paralyze your ass and then you'll just be a vegetable while I take care of Katie and you sit there and do nothing about it. So there's a bit of a struggle and Gemma gets a couple of good hits in. She destroys her face. And then Katie ends up helping by using the power gloves to activate the robot Bruce. The robot ends up tearing M3GAN in half, but then M3GAN ends up doing this Terminator style thing where half her body is going after Katie. And then Jenna ends up using the head of Bruce to clobber M3GAN. She ends up taking apart her face, exposing her core. And before she can take out the core, M3GAN ends up choking her. And then just before M3GAN chokes her out, Katie steps in, drives a screwdriver through the core, and boom goes the dynamite. Now, before the movie ends, both Gemma and Katie are leaving the house, and you can see that the Alexa-style virtual assistant called Ava lights up and turns around, which indicates that M3GAN has perhaps transferred a part of herself into Ava, and that's where the sequel will come in. By the way, there's definitely going to be a sequel. This movie made a ton of cash. So what did I think about this movie? It was really good. Now, I'm going to say that it wasn't really scary. There was a couple of scenes that were kind of freaky, but there wasn't anything where I was genuinely terrified. I was entertained throughout most of the movie. There's a lot of setup and payoff throughout the movie. I love setup and payoff throughout movies when they show certain things and they just show them briefly, or they explain something about it and then it's used later in the movie. I love that in movies. Now, the actors themselves were pretty good. It's really funny because the actress who plays Gemma, Ashley Williams, she looks a lot like Anna Kendrick, to the point where I even Googled it and there's no relation. Am I being a racist? Is it because she has a jagged face and that flat brown hair like Anna Kendrick that I think that they look alike? I don't know. The girl who played Katie did a really good job as well. You know, it's really tough with child actors. They can be really fucking annoying sometimes, and it's a really tough balance to get. I didn't feel annoyed with the actor or the character itself, so I thought they did a really good job with Katie. Even though she acted up, she she had a valid reason for doing so. I mean, for Christ's sake, she just lost her parents a few days ago, and then her aunt, instead of taking care of her, instead of consoling her, gives her a fucking autonomous AI robot that almost kills her. You could forgive her for being the way she is. The rest of the cast was okay. The actresses that both played the voice and the body of M3GAN did a fantastic job. Now, the atmosphere and the cinematography of the movie was just fine. There's a lot of different location changes, so nothing feels stale. What I like about this movie is that it doesn't feel like a COVID-19 movie. You ever watch those movies where it feels like it was just filmed in a single room and everybody's separated and the acting scenes feel disjointed and disconnected? This movie did not have that. This felt like a genuine movie, and I appreciate that. Now, as I said, there wasn't a lot of jump scares. There's a lot of creepiness involved, especially with all the talk about AI lately, and I think the movie is original enough. You're going to have people that compare it to Child's Play, but it's not the same thing, because in Child's Play, a serial killer uses voodoo to enter the body of a doll, whereas M3GAN is a genuine artificial intelligence who becomes self-aware and then just becomes homicidal at the same time. Now, the pacing of the movie was pretty good. I actually didn't feel bored too much. In fact, it felt like the movie went fast towards the end. It felt like it was a little bit slow towards the beginning, and then the middle was okay, and then the end felt a little bit rushed. But overall, it was a very good movie. Now, I wanted to talk about Uncanny Valley. So Uncanny Valley is a term coined by a Japanese professor of robotics, and his name was Masahiro Mori, and it refers to the delicate balance between reality and synthetics. And so basically, M3GAN was purposely made not to look too realistic and not to look too robotic. So there's this fine line where it's not realistic enough where your brain starts to reject the idea that this is a person because it's so realistic, and not robotic enough where it throws you off the fact that this is a robot pretending to be a human being. It's a really delicate balance, and I appreciate the way that they made M3GAN. She doesn't look hyper realistic. She definitely looks like a robot from close up, but from far away, she would look like a little girl. And her voice has this auto-tune to it, which makes it kind of creepy, although I did notice at the end of the movie that the auto-tune was almost gone and she felt like she was talking much more natural. This was a great movie. I actually loved the fact that they used a mixture of CGI and practical effects for M3GAN. It never felt like it was a CGI person. I'm glad that they used a real person. You know, when I saw the trailer for the movie Cocaine Bear, I was just like, I can't do it. I can't do movies where the CGI is so bad and so blatant that it just throws you off the elements of the movie. If it's supposed to be a suspenseful movie, if it's supposed to be a horror movie, how can you stay in that mindset when the CGI looks so ridiculous? It looks like PS1 graphics, but they did a really great job here with M3GAN. So yeah, that's my take on M3GAN. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening. If you like the content that I provided, hit the like, hit the subscribe. If you didn't like the content, well, blow me.